This reality that we're experiencing has been hijacked by a force that some ancient people called archons. The Gnostics had a completely different view of reality than religion, which is why the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Church tried to destroy them wherever they got any strength and any foothold. They ran the Great Library at Alexandria, which had something like 500,000 scrolls detailing the beliefs of the ancient world and the history of the ancient world, destroyed by the Roman Church. Religious establishment wanted these people destroyed because they were dangerous, because they had the truths they didn't want the people to know about. When we look into Gnostic cosmology and its references to what are called archons, we find a universe of ideas that challenges assumptions about reality and spirituality. This topic is compelling not only for presenting lesser-known narratives, but also because it encourages us to think about how aware we really are of our inner potential. In manuscripts, such as the Hypostasis of the Archons, there are references to entities capable of keeping the human mind in a state of forgetfulness, suggesting that physical reality might be just part of a larger backdrop. This viewpoint contrasts with orthodox readings of Christianity, which tend to focus on established rituals and beliefs. However, commentators such as Elaine Pagels point out that Gnostic texts show a different, perhaps subversive path. Salvation would happen the moment an individual taps into inner knowledge, gnosis, and awakens to his or her divine nature. That raises the possibility that the boundaries between heaven and earth might be more permeable than they appear under conventional doctrine. In light of this contrast, it becomes important to ask whether certain groups, visible or hidden, might prefer that most people never discover deeper spiritual truths. This line of thinking resonates with various conspiracy theories that attribute social and political control to a hidden power. Thus, the question arises, what if the prison described in ancient Gnostic writings is, at least in part, a metaphor for political, cultural, or even psychological manipulation? This leads to a central issue. How far can we see beyond what we are taught is the truth? Some scholars believe that the so-called resurrection can happen while we are still alive, provided there is a break with the dogmas that cloud our perception. That break is an invitation to deeper investigation. If the Gnostic message proposes an awakening through inner exploration, does it conflict with the bedrock of traditional Christian faith, or does it serve as a little explored spiritual complement? Opinions vary, but it is worth noting that the debate goes far beyond any romanticized defense of Gnosticism. Some see these texts as ancient allegories, while others see them as the true hidden teachings of early Christianity. Whether these writings are viewed symbolically or taken literally depends on one's individual openness to new ways of seeing. In any case, examining the archons raises valuable questions about the origins of consciousness, freedom of thought, and the authenticity of convictions long considered unshakable. Going deeper into Gnostic cosmology, it becomes clear that a variety of historical and theological currents converge to form a collection of ideas known for its daring interpretations of reality. The documents found at Nag Hammadi in 1945 shed light on how Gnosticism took shape in the religious ferment of the Mediterranean region between the 2nd and 4th centuries AD. These texts, which include Gospels, letters, and treatises, often challenge or contradict more widely accepted Christian doctrines of the time. The Hypostasis of the Archons is a noteworthy example, describing a cosmos ruled by these beings who cloud humankind's inner vision. Before focusing on the concept of archons, it helps to clarify the figure of the demiurge. In Gnostic theology, the demiurge is a lesser divinity who created the material world, but lacks the fullness of the true God. He is depicted as a cosmic craftsman who shapes matter and imposes laws and structures that confine human thought. In some passages, there is criticism of the God of the Old Testament, described as strict and unforgiving. Thus, certain Gnostic groups view this demiurge as a fraud, posing as the supreme creator. Within this framework, the archons appear as guardians of celestial or material spheres. Each archon exerts power over a particular realm, blocking souls from rising to spiritual knowledge. In some manuscripts, they are linked to the 7 known celestial bodies: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. suggesting a link between Gnostic cosmology and astrological traditions. If there is a transit route between the spiritual dimension and the physical world, these beings would act as sentinels, obstructing or twisting the awakening process. Texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas reinforce the idea that liberation comes from recognizing an internal light, sometimes called a divine spark, hidden beneath layers of ignorance and illusion sustained by the archons. Gnosis, a deep knowledge that goes beyond mere reason, is how individuals regain this spiritual inheritance. Hermetic schools, such as the Corpus Hermeticum, also address the notion of planetary spheres and intermediate gods, apparently aligning with Gnostic views on cosmic influences over the human psyche. The spread of these ideas was not without resistance. Church authorities rejected the idea of a malevolent god or lesser deities conspiring against humanity. Gnostic interpreters, however, argued that the literal text of the canonical Gospels was not enough, and insisted on hidden teachings for those willing to go beyond attachment to the material realm. The prison of consciousness then appeared as the Archon's main weapon. Without breaking free from purely worldly values, there could be no inner progress. Gnosticism also intersects with the dualistic philosophy of schools like Platonism, which already postulated distinct levels of reality: ideal world versus sensible world. In some passages, Gnosticism takes this dualism even further, viewing the physical cosmos as inherently flawed or even harmful, that has deep spiritual implications. Everything we think of as ordinary life might be a form of captivity from which only true knowledge can free us. Modern scholars like Elaine Pagels argue that understanding the Gnostic Gospels illuminates key aspects of the first theological disagreements within Christianity. Bentley Layton highlights the literary and theological complexity of the Nag Hammadi texts, stressing that Gnosticism was not merely a set of exotic beliefs, but a refined theology. Some researchers see parallels between Gnostic cosmology and other myths of fall and redemption, common in many cultures. Seeing how radical these Gnostic ideas were goes beyond mere academic interest. Recognizing the subversive quality these Gnostic ideas were goes beyond mere academic interest. Recognizing the subversive quality of Gnostic thought makes it clear that they challenged established truths, prompting a reconsideration of the essence of the divine and the human condition. Some of their doctrines suggest that suffering and existential emptiness may stem from disconnection with the pleroma, the divine totality. If archons partly cause this separation, an intriguing point arises. Could this mythical structure encourage an active stand against any system that fosters spiritual passivity? For Gnostics, there is something invaluable in human consciousness, something that can be reignited despite the limitations of the material world. Challenging the orthodox perspective means questioning the notion of original sin and pointing to ignorance as the source of humanity's problems. Instead of salvation mediated by institutions, Gnosticism calls for an inner quest. Taken either literally or symbolically, Gnosticism poses current and profound questions. What is the nature of the divine? To what extent do external structures restrict our freedom of thought and feeling? From this angle, studying Gnosticism is not just about tracing history, but about prompting us to question reality itself. Looking at the archons as the heart of the Gnostic narrative reveals how ancient texts interpret the human condition. Depicted as administrators of the material world, these entities are said to stop the divine sparks from awakening to spiritual truth. In different manuscripts, each archon has its own traits and responsibilities, yet all of them share the same purpose: keeping consciousness away from gnosis. They are, therefore, the ultimate antagonists on the path of self-discovery. In works like the Hypostasis of the Archons, these beings control not only the physical domain, but also the psychological realm, planting illusions that lead people to believe the visible world is all that exists. Today's readers often see a parallel to social mechanisms that encourage conformity, making imprisonment a matter of prefabricated beliefs that hamper clear thinking. Even though they are clearly portrayed as adversaries, Gnostic cosmology does not present a single hero who saves humanity as a whole. Liberation is essentially personal, led by an inner awakening. Passages from the Gospel of Thomas underscore the need to seek within for the light that shatters illusion. Victory over the archons takes place, therefore, when each person recognizes his or her own divine essence, flipping the usual epic plot in favor of an individual odyssey. Other traditions also refer to forces that feed on psychic energy or block mental and spiritual progress. Although they may not always bear the name archons, conceptual echoes can be found throughout various esoteric systems. The main warning is that the real threats may lie within, such as ignorance and clinging to immobilizing dogmas. Reflecting on the role of the archons suggests that part of human nature, even unconsciously, might be complicit in this scheme, choosing the safety of a ready-made reality over the independence that comes with inner knowledge. In this sense, Gnosticism reminds us that the archons represent anything that limits awareness. By stressing the need to overcome these obstacles, Gnostic texts treat each seeker as the lead character. No single savior is battling the entities on everyone's behalf, only the chance for each of us to be freed through the inner quest. That gives Gnostic cosmology a unique depth. The archons stand guard over appearances, and their symbolic defeat occurs when the individual wakes up to something greater than the material realm. A close reading of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts makes it clear how much emphasis is placed on the archons as maintainers of illusion. In the hypostasis of the archons, for instance, there are passages describing how these entities obscure man's perception so he does not know his divine origin. That line, found in academic translations, reinforces the idea that the great challenge for any Gnostic seeker is to break the barrier set up by the archons. Tradition holds that each of these beings rules a particular sphere, blocking the soul's path to inner knowledge. This blockade is not just physical, but involves manipulating the deep beliefs and convictions that shape how we interpret the world. When we think about this, we see that the archons do not show up as straightforward villains in an epic tale. Rather, they operate in a subtle way, by saturating the mind with apparently unquestionable truths. Passages in the so-called Gospel of the Egyptians say that they shape thought, making man believe there is nothing beyond what his eyes can see. This view suggests a symbolic relationship with spiritual ignorance, described at varying depths in different wisdom schools. The controversy appears when parallels are drawn between these Gnostic references and certain modern theories regarding media manipulation or mass mind control, linking Gnostic ideas to contemporary social and political reflections. In many texts, the material world is labeled an imperfect construction, the handiwork of a demiurge, unaware of the true transcendent God, acting as extensions of a demiurge unaware of the true transcendent God. Acting as extensions of this demiurge, the archons would perpetuate the illusion that matter is the only reality. This runs directly contrary to more traditional Christian beliefs that tie creation to the supreme God. The tension grows when one reads ancient documents stating that the creator of this world does not act in the name of the complete light. Such a claim provokes considerable theological conflict, positing a strong dualism in which matter is not just different from spirit, but also opposed to it. Looking at the disputes between early church thinkers and Gnostic groups, we can see how this difference of opinion led to intense theological battles. While Orthodox tradition upheld the fundamental goodness of creation, Gnostic representatives argued that the universe had been flawed from the start. Texts, such as the Gospel of Judas, intensify this discord by showing passages where Jesus himself allegedly explains that the visible world was produced by lower powers. Today, one might draw parallels between the Orthodox view, which accepts the mundane world as God's good creation, later spoiled by sin, and the Gnostic view, which sees it as innately flawed. From this perspective, the archon control does not seem so far-fetched, but rather a theological explanation for humanity's spiritual estrangement. With the discovery of the Nag Hammadi translations in the mid-20th century, the Western world gained access to many of the so-called keys to Gnostic understanding. Among them, the concept of gnosis, understood as direct and non-transferable knowledge of the divine, became especially prominent. Unlike doctrines that favor mediation by religious institutions, these ancient currents made it clear that real awakening occurs within each person. Passages in the Gospel of Thomas point to this notion by saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." This secret revelation suggests that liberation does not need to wait for any final judgment or apocalyptic event. The Gnostic proposition says that resurrection, typically read as a future event, may be experienced the moment the divine light awakens in the seeker's consciousness. This perspective radically challenges traditional interpretations of certain biblical texts and further widens the gap between the official church view and the Gnostic viewpoint. It is highly provocative. What if salvation is not merely granted through rituals and dogmas, but surfaces when a person recognizes the divine spark within? Such a question forces us to think about whether established institutions could ever fully embrace or whether they must reject such an idea. Studying the archons in a society defined by mass communication technologies and heated debates about control and manipulation opens the door to many possibilities. Modern authors like John Lash have reinterpreted Gnostic cosmology to explain certain power dynamics in governments, corporations, and influential groups. The idea that archon structures might show up as public policies encouraging conformity or as media narratives designed to tame critical thinking has gained traction in conspiratorial circles. Critics, though, caution that such arguments might take things too literally and end up treating archons as an all-purpose explanation for every form of social oppression. Some psychological approaches also link the archons to internal obstacles, fears, or traumas that block human potential. After all, if Gnostic entities work by promoting ignorance or forgetfulness of our essence, might we compare them to negative emotions that hamper personal growth? In this context, Gnostic study need not be relegated to pure religious speculation, but can serve as a metaphor for exploring our inner lives. Each time we try to awaken to inner freedom, archons can take the form of thoughts that stir insecurity, attachment to the past, or passive acceptance of the status quo. Contemporary writers like David Icke have popularized the notion of reptilians, extraterrestrial beings who supposedly manipulate world leaders and corporations behind the scenes. Even though the original Gnostic texts do not specifically mention reptilian beings, some present-day schools of thought draw links between archons and reptilians, interpreting both as symbols of the world, of the same phenomenon, forces feeding off human energy and directing civilization's path. This topic is controversial because it blends esoteric, theological, and fictional elements, resulting in theories that range from strictly literal interpretations to purely symbolic ones. According to some lectures and books, describing the archons as beings acting on the fringes of the divine plan lines up with the portrayal of reptilians as dimensional intruders. This association, however, lacks direct historical backing from the Nag Hammadi texts, drawing criticism from scholars who want to keep the Gnostic context within its late antiquity framework. Nonetheless, the rise of this syncretism shows that the idea of invisible influences on humanity is not limited to the distant past. Some groups still see Gnostic cosmology as a key to interpreting political, media, or even extraterrestrial phenomena. Among the biggest names in the study of Gnosticism, Elaine Pagels stands out for examining the historical and religious ramifications of the Nag Hammadi findings in works like the Gnostic Gospels. Scholars such as Bentley Layton have also contributed translations and analyses that clarify obscure passages in these texts. With the help of these academic works, the archon discussion gains depth, grounded in philological and historical research that contextualizes each reference. These sources indicate that Gnostic communities varied, so they did not always share a uniform perspective on the archons, with details subject to differing interpretations. Outside academic research, non-scholarly sources multiply in conspiratorial circles, and each approach has a different degree of credibility. Some people take the entirety of Gnostic cosmology literally, seeing it as a realistic account of evil entities operating on our planet. Others, leaning toward a symbolic view, interpret archons as archetypes of control or recurring energetic patterns in the collective psyche. Whichever position one adopts, the clash between these interpretations shows how the topic remains very much alive, stimulating debate about the core of reality and human vulnerability to hidden forces. Looking at archons and their many echoes in different fields highlights the power of a concept that, even though ancient, resonates with modern concerns. At bottom, the question is there a veil obscuring our divine nature? Whether that veil is enforced by actual entities or by social, political, and psychological mechanisms of repression. It is important to see that these key events ultimately serve to spark a healthy restlessness because they challenge dogmas and invite us to pursue gnosis as a path to freedom. The existence of conflicting interpretations, or apparently radical ideas, demonstrates that Gnosticism is not just an isolated chapter in Christian history. It connects with humanity's broader yearnings for freedom, self-knowledge, and transcendence. Ultimately, the Gnostic path calls for discernment. By exploring the texts and comparing them with personal experience or even conspiracy theories, everyone arrives at a unique outlook on the authenticity or relevance of these ideas. This naturally leads us to ask, is reality as unquestionable as daily life makes it seem? If there really are forces determined to keep us in the dark, can we overcome them by digging deeper into our inner divine source? These questions have no final answer, as Gnosticism, by definition, offers an endless search for transforming knowledge. Perhaps the most important takeaway is realizing that change begins when we decide to question our own reality and recognize that there might be realms beyond appearances. The discussion about the archons goes beyond theology. First, it questions whether there are forces, literal or symbolic, that shape our way of thinking. That has serious repercussions for our concept of personal freedom. If there is a veil keeping our consciousness dormant, we need to examine how social, religious, and political institutions might reinforce or break that condition. Many Gnostic texts stress that the material world is not just limited but is purposely arranged to keep us ignorant of our true nature. From this angle, passively accepting social norms might amount to colluding with the archons. In practice, these reflections come up when considering modern-day reports of large-scale control. Some see governments and corporations acting as archons, keeping the masses distracted or dependent and stifling autonomy. That connection raises questions about whether we can tell propaganda from genuine information or distinguish authentic spiritual values from ritualistic formalities. Ancient references, like the hypostasis of the archons, mention their influence over the mind, suggesting that this phenomenon could be internal as well as external, tied to processes of self-sabotage. Ignorance and fear sustain paralysis, a fact that resonates socially and psychologically. On the other hand, there are positive takeaways. Mentions of a divine spark indicate the possibility of reversing the situation. If matter is a prison, then gnosis is the key, awakening each individual to higher dimensions. This idea can encourage a sense of spiritual responsibility because liberation depends more on interior transformation than on external reforms. By challenging orthodox doctrines, Gnosticism argues that salvation comes from a genuine personal quest rather than mere adherence to prescribed rites. Controversial though it may be, this perspective also inspires us to take a deeper look at well-established paradigms. In a world consumed by discussions of manipulation and surveillance, thinking about the Gnostic concept of the archons can add another layer of understanding. The notion that forces exist to keep the majority controlled does not seem entirely paranoid, but instead echoes an ancient spiritual worldview. At its core, the central message is that any serious analysis of power and consciousness requires sharp awareness of whatever we accept as truth. If human beings truly possess a divine essence, the challenge is to cultivate the clarity needed to know when we are being manipulated. The battle against the archons described in millennial texts reverberates today as a call to examine how real or manufactured our perceptions are, and how accountable we are for our own awakening. Realizing that what we see might mask deeper dimensions prompts questions about the origin and purpose of life. Ancient manuscripts, such as those from Nag Hammadi, describe archons who wield authority to keep consciousness in the dark. Gnostic teaching holds that the path to spiritual freedom is rooted not in external factors, but in personal engagement with inner knowledge. Conversely, traditional Christian orthodoxy teaches that institutional practices and beliefs mediate salvation, setting up a core conflict. Is liberation an individual affair, or does it rely on religious structures? Gnosticism emphasizes that resurrection can happen in this life when we reject the values imposed by the archons. This view challenges the usual divide between the material world and spiritual fulfillment. If a hidden veil is concealing the sacred, each of us is responsible for removing it. Modern interpretations link this dynamic to conspiratorial theories, suggesting that political and media systems replicate the patterns that Gnostics might call archontic. Thus we ask, to what extent does today's mental conditioning inherit a form of spiritual control? Though it may unsettle us, these questions do not come with instant certainties. Gnostic traditions call for personal investigation and direct experience, steering clear of blind faith. Time and again, Gnostic texts urge, "Know yourself and you will know the divine." Literally or symbolically, the message is clear. Unless we take action, the outer influence continues to mold our consciousness. Thus, we conclude that Gnostic salvation is not based on dogmas, but on a radical shift in perception. A renewed appreciation for the divine spark within. Rather than waiting for heavenly intervention, Gnosticism encourages every seeker to question reality and re-establish a bond with the creative principle. Even though this view may clash with conventional doctrines, it reminds us that the real key is an awakening that goes beyond established beliefs. All transformation begins the moment we recognize our own role as co-creators. All transformation begins when you acknowledge your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you reach this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, let us know in the comments by saying, "It made sense to me."